Welcome to the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. We are proclaiming liberty one show at a time, and the next one starts right now. Our soldiers died for your freedom. God gave us all rights and never leave them. It's time to step up for your freedom. So rally up now, this is America. Our soldiers died for your freedom. God gave us all rights and never leave them. Now it's time to step up for your freedom. So rally up, this is America. Well, guess who it is? Yep, that's right, Clint Armitage with the Liberty Podcast. And we're here with another episode. And I've brought Dirk back into the studio since we're having such good conversations. And like I said in the other episodes, we are going to be doing multiple episodes together here. So you'll be hearing his voice. I should start calling him the guest host, actually. Dirk, you're the guest host.
You guys are just eavesdropping on what we normally talk about. So.
Right. And so... anyways, thanks for coming by again, Dirk, for this next new episode, or new topic, I should say, that we're going to be talking about. And I really appreciate your input on it because I think you have good stuff to say. I think you have a good, perspective, especially coming from a cop, coming from, a conservative, a believer, and giving your good, your spiritual insight on what you believe God is doing in this world and what God is telling us to do in this world as we start to see some radical changes that have really kind of made me personally a little apprehensive.
Okay. Because
of some of the stuff that's going on in America, some of the fundamental beliefs that are like 180 degrees different than what they used to be, like flipped upside down on its head. Right. Good is evil, evil is good kind of thing. And I'm seeing that totally. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna start off with a quote, and then I will I'll tell you who gave the quote, and then we'll talk about that, and it's related to kind of where we are, or actually where America started kind of thing.
Cool.
Okay? All right, so here's the quote. The fundamental basis of this nation's laws was given to Moses on the Mount. If we don't have a proper fundamental moral background, we will finally end up with a totalitarian government which does not believe in the rights for anybody except the state. Unquote. President Harry Truman.
Okay.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it is pretty easy, pretty simple, right? We have Moses who brings us the law. We're not supposed to steal. We're not supposed to lie. We're not supposed to do all these bad things. Imagine if 10 laws, imagine if we just did them. Mm-hmm. How different things would be, right? And I think that God has given us what we call agency, right? The right to choose. Yeah. We have the right to choose, but we don't have the right to choose the consequences. He gives us these laws not because he doesn't love us or he wants to restrict us, but because he knows the consequences of violating those laws.
Right.
And if we won't base our nation's laws on those fundamental laws given by God, and really the higher law is what? To love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Right. If we can't do that, then we're going to force government to take over. And it's going to be a real synopsis from a speaker, Neil A. Maxwell, where he said that if we don't govern ourselves, if we will not police ourselves and do the things that were right for right's sake, and again, this is a synopsis of what he said, there's not enough police officers to make sure that we do. And before too long, beating the system will become the system. Right. And I worry that, we have all these laws, right? You couldn't possibly, as a cop, you look in the penal code, you're like, bro, I know like 6 or 7 of these things, and everything else is something we have to look up. But I think we need to teach people true and correct principles and let them govern themselves. And they have to believe that. But if we allow the government to say, hey, we're going to make all these different laws in minutia, then we become like the scribes and the Pharisees, right? Where we can only tie a certain knot on the Sabbath, and we can only walk so far. And if we do that, then instead of the spirit of the law, we're living the letter of the law. Right. And we're not living it because we want to live it. We're living it because we're compelled to live it. That's not agency. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna follow up with a question on that because I like your take on the laws, but see, notice, Dirk's a cop, current cop, an active cop.
Right.
And so I want to get a take on a couple things. One, I want to get a cop take, and then two, I want to get a believer's take. But
Okay.
first one I want to ask is, there's a across the country, at least right now in this kind of climate, or what we see in the media, is we find that cops are here to destroy our liberty. Cops are here to hold us accountable to the point where we actually don't have liberty.
Okay.
What's your thoughts on that in terms of your personal cop perspective, and then what you believe, a community of cops, as a cops as a whole, their take on laws, and because you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I want you to expound on the fact that I can kind of tell that your belief is self-governance.
Yeah, well, an experience. I wasn't personally involved in it, but it was relayed to me. It happened in my county. There was a demonstration by a very prominent group, and the mother chapter of this group said, "Let's have this at night," and the group's like, "No, we're not going to do that." And the group came to a prominent government center area to protest. They were protesting the police. And with their group, they had people that made sure to keep people out of the traffic. They had people that were organizing it. They wanted a peaceful protest. And my county supplied peace officers from the local jurisdictions and from the county jurisdictions to protect that free speech. That was beautiful. They did it exactly the right way. Mm-hmm. If you want to protest that way, by all means, please do so. Yeah. If there's things that are wrong, we want to be there to be that buffer, so when somebody who believes differently than you do, but doesn't want to hear it and wants to try to, by violence, keep you from saying what you're saying, mm-hmm. we want to be that buffer to protect you from that. Mm-hmm. Now, different experience. I did personally experience this. We go down to the riots, and people are burning things down and tearing up things, and I see poor people pulling the contents out of their shops that have been looted, what they can get left.
Business owners.
The business owners. I see businesses being burned down. I see patrol units tore up. That's not an acceptable way. We have the right to peaceably assemble, mm-hmm. and as peace officers, we should support that. And if it's a different view than ours, too bad. That's right. At that point, I'm the government. Mm-hmm. Now, as a believer, I believe in living by the laws of the land. I believe in respecting other people's stuff. I don't believe in blocking traffic, because we never know. Maybe you need to get to a doctor's appointment for an oncology appointment. Yeah. But now I'm standing in the street because I'm protesting that I don't like knobby tires on my mountain bike. I want slick tires. I'm just pulling something silly out of the sky. Yeah. But we have the absolute right to protest. We have the absolute right to do these things, but we need to abide by the law, and we need to be reasonable. And I think, unfortunately, what happens in this country is that that's not sensational. Yeah, right. It doesn't sell newspapers. This protest that these people had, that was so great, mm-hmm. that was executed perfectly. This group, super. I'm in awe. Yeah. They did it the American way. They did it the American way, and it was directed at guys like me. Yeah. They said that there's stuff wrong with how the police are doing things, mm-hmm. and we had police officers there to make sure that you could protest that. Yeah. You have the right to the redress of grievances. You have the right to say, I don't think the government is working correctly. Mm-hmm. We need to change. That's a God-given right. Mm-hmm. To use your agency to stand up, to speak for liberty. Right. Absolutely. But doing it the right way so that it doesn't turn into a violent episode where the cops feel like they have to defend either themselves or others. Because it's not fun getting rocks and bottles. It's just not. And the cops, it's not fun. Nobody wants to get beat up like that. Right. But I promise you, and do we have some squirrels in the group that are just bad apples? Absolutely. Yeah. Right? I mean, every profession. On both sides. Every profession does. Yeah. But we're there to make sure that you can peaceably do this, even though we don't disagree. We may completely disagree. Mm-hmm. If you do it peaceably, the good guys are going to want you to do it. And if there's changes that we enact through the legislature and through voting, great.
Right.
But you don't get to throw rocks and bottles. You don't get to throw frozen water bottles and fireworks and use lasers. You don't get to burn down the CVS. You don't get to tear up mom and pop shops.
Did you get hit by any of that stuff when you're at the riot? Or
Thankfully,
were you
no.
off?
No,
Okay.
I was online in a vehicle supporting the formation that was
okay.
moving forward. So
Yeah.
no.
Okay.
No.
But that was happening, though.
That was happening, and it's unfortunate. And it was interesting because you did have some one-on-one interactions with people.
Uh-huh. And what was that like? what
Well,
was the
we're
kind of
driving.
take?
We're driving down the street.
Yeah.
There's burnout police cars. We're moving from one location to another, more secure location, and there's a guy taking photographs, and he's videoing. And as we're rolling through, of course, we roll down with the windows down so we can hear what's going on. And he looks at me directly and goes, "People like you are going to die."
People like you.
Yeah.
What do you think he meant by that?
I think that he meant ill towards me and my
Cop?
profession.
Or the way you look?
The
or
guy,
what was it?
he and I,
Everything?
we've never met each
Yeah,
other before, right?
Yeah.
But I'm wearing a uniform.
Yeah.
Again, we can disagree without being disagreeable. That doesn't, when you say it that way, you don't open up conversation. I have several friends that they get in arguments with their spouse, and they say things like, "What the F is your problem?"
Yeah.
Well, bro, that's not opening communication.
Right.
That's shutting it down. That interaction was shutting it down. But we had other interactions with people that said, "Believe it or not, officers, we appreciate you guys being out here so we can do what we're doing."
Right.
And these are people that were doing it the right way. And I believe that there are people that go out there and try to do it the right way.
Yeah.
And then you have these bad apples that show up and they're like, "Hey, let's stir it up." But then the problem is that when somebody has a peaceful protest that's quiet, it doesn't
make news.
It doesn't make news.
Yeah. Right.
But when you're tearing things up, all the news cameras want to be out there.
Right. Because and then it goes back to those clicks, goes back to the financial incentives that come with sensationalism,
Right.
and how media is doing that. Well, and we'll probably talk about the media and all that stuff in another episode. But so I want to go from your cop role,
Okay.
and I want to ask you this: what role does the church have in government, if any?
Yes.
What's your take?
Okay. That's a great question. I don't believe that the church has a role in endorsing candidates.
Okay.
I believe that the church should only speak out on issues that they believe are moral issues.
Okay.
Okay? Issues that we talk about when we talk about God's laws.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Period.
So let me.
So
let
I'm
me
not
ask
going
you,
to endorse them as a church say
this person.
we endorse this person.
Right.
But if there's something that becomes a moral issue, I believe 100% that we need to speak out on it.
Okay, so let me kind of get into a little bit of detail then.
Okay.
So if there's something specific in our laws that is being looked at to be repealed or changed, which is happening right now, right? And it may affect liberty. It may not affect. Well, it could affect globally, like a spiritual liberty, but it's more localized for this nation anyway.
Okay.
What do you think either believers individually or the church as a whole should be involved in endorsing or even speaking out about their specific side of that issue?
Absolutely. And I believe both.
Okay.
Right? Because
Explain.
the church as a whole, right, is a name and an entity. But we, as the people on the ground, are the ones that move these things forward. And again, it's that face-to-face conversation. I have some friends that I have different beliefs than they do. They know that I love them. Again, we can disagree without being disagreeable.
Right.
And we respect each other. And if you decide that that's the way that you want to live, that's okay. But we draw a line here, and this is the way that we're going to live. We may not participate in certain functions with you, but know that if you have a problem at your house, we're coming to help. Right? If you need to borrow a generator, we're coming to help because we love you.
Right.
But you can't do that that's a person to person individual thing, and that's how we help people understand. And if we want to hate other people because they have a different belief than we do, that's unfortunate.
Okay, so now what's your take on it? And you could answer from both sides of this here, cop side and also from the church side or believer side. Do you think the church believers, the church should get radical and civilly disobedient? I'm not saying violence. I'm just saying civilly disobedient to the government when it's something that hits in the spiritual realm and where it's going to affect, say spiritual liberties. Radical and civilly disobedient. And I'm not talking violence here. I'm just talking the thought process and how to act.
Okay. Well, let's take it to something maybe realistic, right?
Okay.
Let's talk about COVID.
Yeah.
Let's talk about COVID.
There you go. Yeah, let's talk
about it.
That's what we should be talking about here.
Okay.
We'll probably even go extra on this podcast just because of this topic.
Let's talk about COVID.
Let's go for it.
Should we not wear masks? Should we just say no? I'm not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we really feel strongly about that, and it's a deeply held belief, and
Yeah.
to me, it's not a moral issue,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a different perspective on it because
Yeah.
of information that I have.
Right.
But if I feel, hey, things are not being done the right way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there for a while, could we go to church? No, we couldn't, right? So a fundamental First Amendment
Especially in
right
California.
was being
Right.
put on hold.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So does that mean that we go to church anyway and we just pound our fists on the table and say, no, we're going to do it anyway, we don't care, you can arrest us and all those other things?
Mm-hmm.
Me personally,
Yeah.
as I sit across from you, no. Yeah. I believe that we should go through the legal channels that we have and fight it through the legislature. Hey, we need to enact laws that make sure that we secure these rights. We do it through civil actions, right? And then at the end of the day, we did the very best that we could.
Now, and that's why I bring up civil disobedience. Okay, so for instance, an abortion clinic.
Okay.
A pastor goes to the abortion clinic, stands in front of it and but like stands there and protests in front of the clinic and then gets arrested, but peaceably gets arrested and gets booked into jail or whatever and released, cited and all that. But that's civil disobedience.
Right.
It's nonviolent,
Right.
but he's standing up for what he believes is the truth and what he may believe God called him to do. And that's where my perspective comes in. So I agree with you, but I want to add something to that.
Okay.
I want to add that, so with COVID, for instance, with masks. Now, I am not against masks. I'm not against vaccines either.
Right.
But what I do believe is that God can personally speak to each one of us individually and say, you should probably get the vaccine.
Absolutely.
You should probably wear the mask. But I also believe that he can tell another believer just sitting next to them, you should not get the vaccine and you should not wear a mask. And God knows things. He's omniscient, right? He knows things we would never even have an idea about. And then so people can have their own conviction and what they believe God is calling them to do. But that's where I believe when we come down with these mandates, now we're actually restricting some spiritual liberty that God may be specifically telling each person to do. Because he speaks to us individually and globally as believers, as a church or whatever. But if he's telling me, hey, you need to get the vaccine because if you don't, you may die.
Right.
Okay, fine. You need to wear a mask because you may catch it. Well, there's some people that God has spoke to specifically and has said, and I'm sure of it, just because I know he has to have told somebody, don't get the vaccine because you may die if you get that vaccine because people have had complications from that.
Right.
Or don't wear a mask because, or whatever reason. It could be just because of the spiritual liberty aspect of this. So that's my addition to what you're saying here, is that they may be specifically told by God to do it or not to do it. So if you put a mandate in place, now you are putting an American citizen in a position to do something that may affect them, and even though God has told them not to do it.
Now I'm going to add another layer on.
Okay.
That. And this is good because this is where people get to see that we may disagree, but we're not going to be disagreeable.
Yeah.
So I believe that at the head of my church is a man who is called as a prophet of God.
Okay.
Just as much as Moses was. Okay? That's a bold statement.
Okay.
Let's start there. I believe that he's given us direction in church, and he has urged us to get the vaccine and urged us when social distancing is not possible to wear masks, to protect one another. And more so, and this man was a heart surgeon, more so when we wear a mask, it keeps what's in us.
Yeah.
And it's not protecting us.
It's logical.
It just keeps it. And so for me personally, I believe that this man's a prophet.
Okay.
And he's asked us to do that. Now, here's the blessing of it. You have the absolute right to follow the directions he's given.
Yeah.
But you have the absolute right to agency that says, hey, I believe that I personally prayed about it.
Yeah.
And God told me because of your makeup, you're not going to, you shouldn't do it. And you have that absolute right.
Right.
And so that's what I hope people understand, again, is that, yes, there are going to be some things that we're told. You have the right to make choices. You have the agency to choose. You just don't have the right to choose the consequences.
So, okay, say if, and that's where I want to get into, is the church's stance or individual believers' stance on these mandates. Now, if they feel like, yeah, I was called not to. Okay, but I'm going to accept the consequence doing it a civil disobedience, right?
Okay.
But I'm going to accept the consequence peacefully because I know God has called me not to. If that's the way it goes, then that's what I have to accept. Right. So they have to say get cited or say lose a job, right? Because there's still some companies that are holding to that federal mandate, even though it's been put on hold, by the Supreme Court, right? So, or actually a district court, I think, but it has been stopped, at least for now, and so some companies are still going through with it, and so people may lose their job or have lost their job from it. Now, that I believe is something that you have to accept with that. If you're following God's calling, then God will provide for you if that's what He's calling you to do. And just be sure about it.
I have a great, a good friend at work. Her son was a police officer.
Okay.
In another state, and he didn't feel comfortable with the mandate, and they said, "Hey, we're going to mandate it." So, and he said, "You know what? Thank you, but no thank you." And he lost his job.
Yeah.
I respect people like that, and why I respect them is because they stand by their convictions. I may not have that same conviction, but they stood by it. Because I've heard many stories of people say, "Oh, I'm not going to get this. I'm not going to get the jab. This, that, and the other." And then when it comes, they're like, "Hey, okay, well, I'm sorry, buddy. You're going to lose your job." They're like, "Yeah, I really like to eat, and I'm going to go ahead and get the jab."
Right.
I respect people more who say, "You know what? No, I'm sorry."
Yeah.
And stand by your convictions.
Right.
Because you have to do what's right for you. And I tell people that. I say, I have information that to me I hold as information that's sacred, that's given to a worldwide church by a man who I revere as a prophet.
Right.
Actually, 3 men.
Okay. And so that's where I come along and say they may have been individually called by God not to.
Right.
And so they're standing by that conviction or whatever reason they're doing it for. But I don't believe in America we should be mandated to be forced into a medical procedure that, one, it's not a long-term proven solution.
Right.
And we've seen, obviously, now the things that were made as one of the positives of getting the vaccine was that you're not going to get it. But obviously that's been disproven because people are getting it like crazy and they're vaccinated. So, and I'm not saying either way. What I'm trying to say is, I still believe this is America, and we should have the right to choose. But I think one of the problems is fear is coming in to people, and they're being afraid, and now they're making decisions based on their fear,
right?
And they're putting it on other people now, and so that's where we're coming into the problems. And now, wait a minute, now your actions are affecting me because I'm scared of the vaccine or I'm scared of the COVID, and so now your decision not to get vaccinated is affecting me when. See, that's where if you buy into fear, or you don't buy into providence, you don't buy into God controlling things and being sovereign in your life, and you speaking specifically with God and asking Him, Lord, can you let me know what I need to do? Because I want to do the right thing for Him and do the right thing for my family or whatever. And we need to get that information from God. Well, a lot of people in this country don't connect with God, so they're not even going to have that. So yeah, fear is going to be a factor that they make the decision on. But that's where the problem comes in, is when you start mandating laws that's going to affect other people just because of their decision, their medical decision, their personal decision not to get it.
Well,
that's my issue.
Anytime you force people to do things against their will, right, that's Satan's plan.
Right.
His plan is to force people to do what he wants us to do. Heavenly Father's plan, God's plan, is to give us agency. Now, here's the issue, though. You have to accept the consequences, too, right?
Yes.
Agency is not a free gift, so that's why we call it agency. Yeah. We don't call it free agency. We call it agency because you're making a choice,
right,
and you have to endure the consequences, good or bad.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I struggle with any time where we say, you will do this. I would struggle, me personally, more with the government mandates if I didn't have the information I had.
Yeah.
And as a general rule, again, when we sit across the desk from each other, because I have a friend, a dear friend I've known for a very long time, we completely disagree about this thing.
Okay.
But we had a conversation about why I felt that it was important for me and my family to get vaccinated and wear masks. And he had a conversation as to why he feels that it's not important for and we're okay to agree to disagree.
Sure.
And again, but it comes down at that understanding at a person-to-person level, as opposed to, it's easy to throw rocks over the fence at people you can't see.
Right.
It's more difficult to sit right across the table from each other and throw stuff at each other.
Okay. So I'm going to read, I'm going to talk about someone in the Bible that was civilly disobedient and radical.
Okay.
And blessed by God. Okay. So, and it's hard to get more radical, more civil disobedient to the government than this person here. Her name is Rahab.
Okay.
She hid the spies and helped them escape because she was following her convictions to God, even though she was literally being civilly disobedient to the government. You know, the king sent his people in to say, hey, we're the spies. And she said, no. Now, you know, there's other questions about lying and all that. But what I'm talking about is she was blessed by God because she helped. And that's what it says in the Bible. She helped the spies. And that's what was her blessing. The way she did it may have been something to deal with. But what I'm focusing on is the fact that she helped the spies knowing that it was against the government that she was doing it against, you know. But she was doing it for convictions for God, because she did say, she obviously did it because she believed God. God spoke to her. I mean, it says in Joshua 2, verses 8 and 9, it says this, quote, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you, unquote. She says, I know that the Lord has given you this land, so I'm following my convictions and my information that God has given me to protect these spies. So again, civil disobedience and radical, right? Because she could have got killed just for doing that. If they would have been found out, right? She would have been killed. But she was totally radical, totally civilly disobedient, but in a nonviolent way. And she was blessed by God, and she's even in the lineage of Jesus.
But what did she base it on?
I believe her information that she got from God, personally.
Personal revelation.
Yes.
So what we're saying is that personal revelation plays a part in people's lives.
Yes, 100%.
And so if you believe that you've received personal revelation, then you need to make the decisions that you've been directed by our Heavenly Father to do. Right?
Yeah.
Now, when that personal revelation is 180 degrees away from what regular canonized things are, we probably should do a little bit more research, right? And just make sure that it's, because we talked about this before, right? Yeah. With God giving revelation and other sources of revelation, which encourage us to do things that are not right. Right. But again, it hinges on on personal revelation.
Right.
And
and so that's why I brought it up, because it goes to that fact that, hey, some people are called specifically to do things that may be against the government. And
absolutely.
And so as long as they're doing it biblically, or they're doing it for, you know, how God called them to do it, you know what I mean? And they're willing to accept any consequences that God allows because you did it. Like, say she got caught. That might have been God's, you know, providence on that she gets caught because of, whatever. She may learn something from it or whatever. Who knows? But the fact is that we find out now, because we get to read about it, that she was blessed because she hid the spies. And she's in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews there. And so I wanted to make that point as we finish off this episode now, to the fact that when we're dealing with COVID and we're dealing with mandates coming out, that there may be a personal responsibility or duty that you've been called to do if you have received it from God, to not follow along, but again, it has to, like you said, we have to understand, is this truly from God? And are we doing it per what's listed in the Bible? Can I reference a Bible and go, okay, yeah, no, it goes along with what God says is allowable. And as long as we're doing that and we believe it's a calling from God, then I don't see a problem with that.
And something that you and I've talked about in the past, you asked if I had provided information to another person, if I had done it in love.
Oh, uh-huh.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we need to factor that into things too.
Yeah.
What's our motivation?
Yes, right.
Is our motivation to make ourselves great because I was a civilly disobedient person? Mm-hmm. Or was our motivation to secure liberty for other people? Mm-hmm. I mean, how many of the believers ended up stoned?
Oh, yeah. Right? Shoot. I was just reading about
Saul's standing there while Stephen gets yes, rocks, right?
Yeah.
And he ends up being a great believer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so Stephen's
calamity, yes, turns into this huge Christian blessing, right, for everybody, all the believers, right?
Right, and so it goes back to our discussion about sometimes bad things happen to good people.
Yeah.
I guess the big thing, we have to trust in God.
That's it.
And we need to cultivate a relationship mm-hmm. with our Heavenly Father that when we receive revelation, we know.
And it's clear.
And
you're not confused, because God's not a God of confusion, right? He's a God of order. So we have to understand that if we're making this decision, make sure it's the right decision, because we know God is speaking to us. Right. So there's no problem in the civil disobedience and being radical about your faith and what you believe in and your spiritual liberties, but we have to understand there is consequences to
Absolutely.
It. And that we got to make sure that God is actually calling us to it.
Yeah, and you may not be popular, right? You may not get all the likes on Instagram.
You may end up being, Jeremiah or Ezekiel, where everybody's looking at it going, dude, or Noah, right?
Right.
That dude was hated, like laughed at and mocked. But in the end, that's what we have to understand is no matter how you feel about COVID and how you feel about the mandates, what you have to understand is that as long as we're doing it through what we believe is God's calling on our lives, personally and maybe as a church, depending on, what the calling is. Right. We have to, think about it that way, and that's what we have to base our actions on.
Right.
All right. Okay, so that's the end of our episode here. I appreciate you guys coming by, and thanks, Dirk, for coming. We're going to be doing a lot more talking, a lot more episodes with Dirk. Yeah, again, he's going to be my guest host here for a little while now. So I appreciate you listening. I want you to, stay safe, stay motivated, and keep seeking liberty. We'll see you next time.
Our soldiers died for your freedom. God gave us all rights and never leave them. It's time to step up for your freedom. So rally up now, this is America. Our soldiers died for your freedom. God gave us all rights and never leave them. Now it's time to step up for your freedom. So rally up, this is America.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. If you want to get in touch, email us at info@clintarmitage.com.